him out. He is the best of the bad. Let's say hello to Robert Englund. Love you, babe. We'll do lunch.
Wes Craven, more than any other director, is almost single-handedly responsible for the tradition of meta-horror that's more popular than ever today, as everything is essentially self-referential in today's endless drip of pop culture, like a never-ending intellectual property web. Scream is Wes Craven's most well-known meta-horror franchise, serving to deconstruct and almost parody classic horror movie tropes that were cliché by the 1990s.
You should never say who's there. Don't you watch scary movies? It's a death wish. You might as well just come out here to investigate a strange noise or something.
Look, you've had your fun now, so I think you better just leave or else.
Or else what?
Or else my boyfriend will be here any second and he'll be pissed when he finds out.
I thought you didn't have a boyfriend.
I lied!
Meta-horror basically posits that there's a continuity between the real world and the world that horror movies project onto the screen, and it seeks to explore and satirize the horror genre in ways that deconstruct our fears and viewing experience. Often, sometimes literally as in Scream, taking apart the tropes that we've come to expect from the horror genre and asking why they work or don't work, and attempting to lay bare the absurdity of an industry based around blood, gore, and fear that unfolds on film sets in the Hollywood Dream Factory.
'Cause he's probably dead. His body will come popping up in the last reel somewhere. Eyes gouged out, fingers cut off, teeth knocked out. See, the police are always off track with this shit. If they'd watch Prom Night, they'd save time. There's a formula to it. A very simple formula. Everybody's a suspect.
However, 2 years before Wes Craven made Scream, he utilized the same genre deconstructing techniques on a different project. Scream hoped to reinvigorate the slasher subgenre at a time when an overabundance of slasher films had made it fairly stale. Tonight's film was Wes Craven's attempt to try that on a much smaller scale, deconstructing Craven's own work first before trying to explore an entire subgenre, hoping to inject some new blood into a languishing franchise on its 10th anniversary.
Watch this.
Tonight we're talking about New Nightmare, the 7th installment of the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise, and the first one Wes Craven had written and directed since the original.
Miss me?
New Nightmare brought back original Nightmare on Elm Street cast members, including Heather Langenkamp, Robert Englund, and John Saxon. They all play themselves, as does Wes Craven.
But the problem comes when the story dies. And that can happen in a lot of ways. It can get too familiar to people, or somebody waters it down to make it an easier sell, or maybe it's just so upsetting to society that it's banned outright. However it happens, when the story dies, the evil is set free.
In the 10 years since A Nightmare on Elm Street, 6 entries had been made into the franchise, and each time they had strayed farther from Wes Craven's original vision. Rather than being deeply evil and scary, Freddy Krueger became increasingly cartoonish. Wes Craven left his franchise to other directors and didn't like the direction they took it. He returned as a screenwriter for Dream Warriors, the only one to get positive reviews.
The souls of the children give me strength.
However, the direction was left to Chuck Russell, who was lambasted by Roger Ebert for his directing style. In New Nightmare, Wes Craven took control as both writer and director once again. He stripped away the most ridiculous parts of the franchise, including Robert Englund's increasingly over-the-top portrayal of Freddy Krueger.
Freddy's glove was missing, and police are speculating the murders were the result of a botched theft, which apparently took place 2 days ago. At this point, the murder weapon has not been found.
New Nightmare is a film that explores the toll that creating and maintaining a horror movie franchise takes on everyone involved. It does not exist within the continuity of the rest of the franchise, which makes sense, as that would require the acknowledgement that Nightmare on Elm Street is a film franchise in the universe of the film. It exists in the wake of Freddy's Dead, The Final Nightmare. Freddy Krueger has seemingly been killed off, as a 22% on Rotten Tomatoes would testify.
You may recall, or maybe you don't, that in the 6th installment of the popular series, Freddy Krueger, the monster with the knives for fingers, was finally killed for once and all. Unfortunately, it now appears that the series generated an evil force which has been liberated by the screenplay for a sequel.
But what is Freddy? What is a horror movie? Once a character is put on the screen, can it ever really die? Wes Craven takes the ideas that became A Nightmare on Elm Street back to basics. His own nightmares and the writing process that flowed out of them serve as the catalyst for New Nightmare.
And for 10 years, he's been held captive pretty much as Freddy in the Nightmare on Elm Street series. But now that the films have ended, the genie's out of the bottle. That's what the nightmares are telling me, and that's what I'm writing.
A Nightmare on Elm Street in its original form already felt somewhat meta, in the fact that it's a multi-layered dreamscape that continually returns to different parts of its own narrative. In the world of sleep, Craven was able to ask questions about what's real, what's fake, and where that overlaps. And so, New Nightmare was able to pretty easily add layers onto that, melding more of the conscious and subconscious than ever. Heather Langenkamp, 10 years after A Nightmare on Elm Street, is hiding from her final girl fame, living with her FX artist husband Chase and son Dylan.
Well, you know I'm doing a lot more television now, so those hours let me spend a lot more time with my husband and my little boy.
That's right, you have a little boy. What's his name?
Dylan.
With Dylan, does that change your feeling, your perspective about horror movies?
No, not really.
I mean, would you let him see one of your movies?
My son? No.
Chase, of Cut to the Chase FX, is hired by Wes Craven secretly to work on a revamped Claw for a new Nightmare on Elm Street movie. In this one, there will be a more realistic and scary Freddy Krueger. During the writing process, Wes Craven loses control of the story, writing a screenplay that becomes reality as he writes. That's because Freddy Krueger is no longer contained by an ongoing franchise that's captured something real. The idea of Freddy Krueger, the idea of evil incarnate, is trying to push its way into the real world. New Nightmare is basically the Citizens United of intellectual property, positing that a character that ubiquitous can manifest itself into the real world.
Give it up for your Uncle Freddy! Just when you thought it was safe to get back in the bed!
The on-screen real world is littered with the ongoing franchise, showing Wes Craven's clear disgust with the abundance of merchandising. Freddy Krueger toys, posters, costumes, all sapping away the primal core of what Wes Craven believed made the original character scary. And so, Freddy manifests himself, trying to take possession of Heather's son Dylan. There are also many hints to what Wes Craven would end up exploring within the Scream universe. Do horror movies influence the real world, the psychological development of kids?
This man from your films, Freddy Krueger, have you been seeing him?
No.
Can real-life psychopaths, like the fan who repeatedly calls Heather's house, be influenced by the horror movie characters they worship? And what psychological toll does being famous for being a character in a bloody violent genre take on the actors involved? Although the in-universe Wes Craven loses control of his screenplay, it's clear that New Nightmare was an attempt, a successful attempt in my opinion, to take back control of his franchise. And in the process, it launched a mode of storytelling that's become so ingrained in our culture that it's hard to imagine horror movies without it.
The more she read, the more she realized what she had in her hands was nothing more or less than her life itself. That everything she had experienced and thought was bound within these pages.